You all to the first Instructional Innovators of the new calendar year and of the new semester. I already sort of outlined the basics of what we're going to do today. We're going to spend some time talking about culturally relevant teaching, and it's been expanded actually. The term is an expanded culturally relevant teaching and learning. That's so that when we abbreviate it just down to the basic letters, it doesn't get confused with critical race theory, which is also CRT. And then we'll spend the second half of our time talking about the initiative, the plans for reentry students here at RVC. But before we jump into that, we always want to do a little bit of checking in. What's been going on with you lately? It's been a while since we've been together because of the way the calendar fell, of course. So I think the last time we were together was in November. So anything that's happened since then, maybe your break, or of course, like I said, the start of the new school year. So what's been going on?
That's been a busy week, of course, but it's been great. Starting on a Tuesday really threw me because I've got some algebra courses that go Monday, Wednesday, and I've got another algebra course that goes Tuesday, Thursday. And they're numbered chronologically, the section numbers. So all my paperwork's out of order because I started on like section F15 and then the next day I had F10, but we made it work. And it's been going pretty well. It's good week one, I think. It's good to be back.
I've heard in general that the attendance was pretty good, which I thought was notable considering how cold the weather was.
Attendance was excellent. I actually thought the same thing. I don't know the numbers, but it was enough that I was like, wow, we've got I think almost a full house, and only a few people were missing. I take attendance the first 2 weeks, and that's it. But most people were there.
Yeah, same here. I was running 36, 37 out of 40 in most of my classes, so I was really surprised.
I did have someone email me an hour before class, say, hey, is class canceled? It's like, I would have told you if class was canceled, but I think they came, so they figured I would have told them, I guess.
I think for the most part, all of my students were there, and actually within a relatively decent amount of time. They got a couple stragglers show up about 5 minutes late, but pretty unheard of considering the weather events lately.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, you consider that you might have people rolling in a half hour late with the cold weather, cars not starting, waiting for buses, that kind of thing. So any other things to report? As far it could be classes or as usual. If you've got anything that's been going on with you lately. Hey, I will volunteer you, David. You've got some exciting news about your son, right?
Yes, I do. My son, Noah, he's 25 years old. He graduated from NIU and got a degree in business, but his plan was just simply to get a degree so that he could get a job, so he could pay the bills, because he really wants to be a writer. So he's been writing on the side, and he's submitted several things in the past, but finally something got picked up. So he has a book out on the market called Seeds in the Sand. It's available on Amazon right now, and it's kind of a fantasy genre, Lord of the Rings kind of thing. But he's super excited. It's great to see all the effort he put into something kind of come to fruition, and we're just kind of holding our breath and seeing how things go. From what we hear, sales are okay, but we're hoping that it'll get a little better.
Very exciting. Well, and probably at this point, it's a matter of getting that initial momentum, right? Part of it is to get it out there, probably to get some press on it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else? Things to share? Well, I will say I had a nice break. It was unexpectedly restful. I don't go to visit my side of the family. My parents retired to Idaho. So we've been caught in snowstorms enough that we do not travel out to Idaho at winter. So typically we don't go to see my side of the family. My wife's side of the family, we do, but her brother came down with COVID. So we had a Christmas season to ourselves, which was nice. You know, it was easy in some ways. The biggest compliment that I had over the break in regard to the holidays, I think, my daughter, she's 20, she was home from college, and two different friends invited her out for New Year's Eve, and without even talking to us, she told them, no, I think I'm going to spend New Year's Eve with my family. And the thing is, we don't do anything crazy. It's you know, hors d'oeuvres, it's playing games, it's watching the ball drop on New Year's Rockin' Eve. That's about it, but yeah, that's what you wanted to do. So warm and fuzzy right here. And then back to work. And as you all know, a little disappointing for me at the beginning of this new year with the closing of the campus on Friday and the cancellation of faculty development day. Don't know what's exactly going to happen with that yet. I will be conferring with other people who will help me make those decisions very soon. So as soon as I know something, I will share. But that in part is the reason that we're doing some of the things that we're doing today, because I wanted to at least share some of the things that we were planning on doing for Faculty Development Day. The focus for the day, culturally responsive teaching. We had Lorenzo Weber set to come in. He is the director of the Office of Community College Research and Leadership at the U of I, and really in a lot of ways an expert on culturally responsive teaching. I can't claim that. You know, I've read a book or two, so I do have some familiarity. But what I wanted to do is I just wanted to introduce some of the ideas and then talk about them. You know, just talk about what you do in your classroom that might address some of the issues that are brought up through culturally responsive teaching. So I will share my slides. All right, there we go. So my first question is whether or not you already have some level of familiarity with culturally responsive teaching. Have you encountered the term? Are there contexts in which you've heard it? And if not, we can just kind of break down the term and think about it. So have you heard the term before? What sort of ideas do you associate with it?
I've definitely heard the term before. I've never received any type of formal, training or, professional development on it before. So I am definitely interested in hearing more about it. So my knowledge of it is definitely superficial, surface level, PowerPoint level deep.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I agree with David. I've heard of the term, but really have never touched on it in any way, shape, or form.
It's one of those things that's sort of floating out there in the ether, and it's one of the things that does get mentioned. And it is, the reason I said maybe we could just break down the terms is that I do think that at some level, the basics of the practices associated with it are self-explanatory, because we have this idea of culture, we have this idea of being responsive within the context of teaching. So I mean, we do have the basic components there, but the question is, what do we mean when we're talking about cultures? So with that in mind, typically when people are talking about culturally responsive teaching, we're talking about a phenomenon that started roughly in the 1990s. The next slide will take us to the 2000s when the term was actually coined. But before that, there was this research being done that made its way to the forefront in teaching about both Black and brown students in the United States. And the idea was to take a look at how standard practices of teaching reaches different cultures. So these were two particular racial and ethnic groups that were being identified. And the short of the research, and I'm sure that we've become familiar with this at least at some level, is that there are many different ways in which students were being approached in the classroom that didn't address their ways of learning or their ways of understanding because they had these cultural contexts that were not being addressed. One of the things that I think about, and this takes us outside the framework of these racial contexts, and that's where we're eventually going to go with culturally responsive teaching, because there's lots of different cultural groups. One of the things that I think about, we had Donna Beagle speak at one of the professional development days, and she was talking about how she understood things differently than some other people coming from her lower class, poverty-stricken background. And she said these kinds of things persisted. You know, it's not as if she went on to get her PhD and suddenly her ways of knowing changed. So her example was when she got off a plane with someone who was going to the same conference that she was going to. It was in Florida. She got off, and the person she was with said that it feels like a sauna. And she was thinking to herself, for me, I was thinking, feels like a laundromat, you know, because she had this different cultural experience than the other person did. Now, that's sort of a comical example of how people think differently, but of course, those ways of learning are deeply ingrained. Now, culturally responsive teaching has become a little controversial over the years, and we will address this. But one of the two main reasons is that people assert that their discipline is really not connected to race or any other specific cultural context. One of the first ways in which this made its way to the forefront in, I think, popular news was when people were looking at revising the ACTs and the SATs, suggesting that there were ways in which things were being set forth that didn't reach specific cultural groups. And a lot of people at the time said, but knowledge is knowledge, right? You know, if we're looking at syllogisms, right, this is to this, like this is to that, what's the big deal? And that's part of the way the conversation started. The other reason it's become a little controversial is because culturally responsive teaching has become associated with other controversial or politicized initiatives, like DEI initiatives and critical race theory, which might not be completely wrong, but probably isn't completely right either. So next slide, as I promised, here we have a picture of Geneva Gay, who's pretty famous when it comes to culturally responsive teaching, because she coined the term. That this is one of the books that I've read, and it's just called Culturally Responsive Teaching. This is a quotation from her. When academic knowledge and skills are situated within the lived experience and frames of reference for students, they are more personally meaningful, have higher interest appeal, and are learned more easily and thoroughly. I'm pulling this one because this is one of the most often quoted portions from her book. And I think it's interesting because, like I said, the starting point for culturally responsive teaching was with this race study. But here, you know, she's just talking in general, right, about cultures. So, I mean, any responses to the quotation? Thoughts?
I think that the term or the part where she talks about lived experiences, for example, I think my first thought is how difficult that is as an educator, given it's such a wide variety of lived experiences. When I think about the students in my classroom and how many different approaches and perspectives there already are, like appealing to them and making learning more easy, like she said, learning more easily and thoroughly is a real challenge.
Completely agree. I'm glad you brought that up. In fact, that's what we were talking about before. We were saying that now that we have this increased sensitivity to the cultures that are represented in our classroom, it seems like there's a larger burden that is placed on professors in the classroom. How do we reach all the different groups? How do we understand them thoroughly? So as I mentioned, culturally responsive teaching is broadened to address the needs of all cultural groups that need attention. So race, gender, sexuality, ability, economic status, age, and of course, I think in some ways, being a community college, we are more sensitive to the kinds of diversity because we have the diversity is represented within the community. That might not be the same thing that you would get at, say, my daughter is going to the U of I right now. And there's certain kinds of diversity that she sees there because she has 2 roommates who are international students. So, I mean, they're students coming from around the world, but also one of the things that she has noticed is that there's not a whole lot of economic diversity there. Because you have to come from a certain background, and you can get scholarships and loans, right, to go to the U of I, but they're more homogenous there. I think in a lot of ways we're sensitive to this. I know that I'm very sensitive to the groups that are represented here, in part because my wife is the Perkins Grant coordinator, and part of the goal of the Perkins Grant is to make sure that we are addressing these different special populations groups that are represented through the Perkins Grant and through our community college. Culturally responsive teaching has moved from the research to the practices. And the question is, how do we connect? How do we identify? How do we manage to reach different student groups? Now, I have Terrell Strayhorn up there because this is also a story that I'm pulling out from a past professional development day speaker. Terrell Strayhorn was talking about the chemistry professor who went ahead and did this elaborate syllabus because he was an expert teacher. He was an expert in his content area. And so he prepared the syllabus that he would like to teach. But his practice was on the first day of class to take that syllabus in paper form into his class and say basically what I just said, except then he would tear it up because he said that really what I'm trying to do with this content is reach all of you. And if this makes sense to me, but it doesn't make sense to you, then we have a problem in terms of teaching and learning. And so I think that's kind of where we start with culturally responsive teaching. So the first thing that I wanted to do today, so this is all on you. I wanted to think about the groups that we serve. Before we get into the strategies, let's talk about the groups that we serve within your classes. So what student groups have you had in your class that maybe you've identified as being underserved in the past? What students have you needed to understand more fully to teach well? How have you done that within the framework of your courses, and how have you changed things to more fully address those students? So, series of questions there. We can start at the beginning or at any point. So which student groups have you had in your classes that have been underserved? What students have you needed to understand more? How have you accommodated them within the framework of your courses, or how have you changed things?
You're muted, Dave. Still muted.
Still muted. Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah, the list is pretty long of all the different student groups for sure that we have in our classrooms that are underserved, like students of color, students of lower socioeconomic classes, international students for sure, and gender. If you think about it from a gender inequalities perspective, you'd have to consider that as well. So there's a lot of students. As a matter of fact, I would argue that in a typical class of 40, you probably have fewer what I would call dominant majority students than you do students who are underserved. I think, and then the second one about what do we need to do to more fully understand, for me, whether it's through professional development or personal reading self-study kinds of things. I think a lot of it though just comes from experience. The more time I have in the classroom, I think the better I'm getting at this. And if I could, I'll give you an example of one that kind of hit home with me over the past year. Is that I have a lot of students, and again, by the way, I teach sociology. So one thing that I know from research is that kinship ties are stronger among people of color than they are whites. That's just kind of it's just one of those things. Family ties are stronger. And what I've noticed is a lot of my students of color have distractions and things with class that are centered on their family. And I realized at one point that I've never ever dealt with anything like that when I was going to college. When I went to college, my family basically said, "Go to college. That's your job. That's what I want you to focus on." I never had to worry about getting a brother or a sister to an event by driving them because the family only had one car. I never, I was completely kind of isolated from all the family drama because in my family's mind, I'm at college. And it took me a while to realize that particularly students of lower wealth, lower income students and students of color, they're dealing with things that I didn't deal with in college. So for me to relate to them took me to kind of come to that understanding. I really only learned that through being a teacher and interacting with students and hearing about what's going on in their lives. I'm talking way too much. I'm going to stop.
But important things. I would never say you're talking too much because all of those were important to hear.
Yeah, I mean, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go on, go.
No, I mean, I was just gonna say, yeah, I think David summed up point one pretty well. And on point two, I teach math, and I know, and I don't want to give the classic canned math response. You've all heard it from people who teach math about this type of thing. But so I'd love to learn ways to implement culturally responsive teaching effectively. I just am always up against sort of a difficulty, I think, with that. And on one hand, it's nice. I think a lot of people really do learn math the same way. I mean, we conceptualize numbers in our head pretty much only in one way, I mean, and from there, it's like, okay, well, there's a couple ways to conceptualize addition, and I like talking about all the different possible ways to conceptualize addition in order to serve people who learn differently. But it's almost kind of a blessing and a curse that I feel like there's only sort of a couple canonical ways to conceptualize a various math topic, and I try to present each of them in order to reach different groups of people. And that's my way of sort of raising the math issue that gets raised a lot in talks like this, while totally saying, I'm sure there's a lot that I need to know and learn about how to present math. So.
Well, and one of the things that I'll say is I'm very sympathetic to that because my background, as you know, in terms of my life as a professor, was teaching literature and media. So when it came to the content that I could choose, I had a certain amount of flexibility. So if I were teaching a class, I'll give you an example of my very first year. I was teaching literature class. There was a theme class, hero and anti-hero. And there were certain expectations as you go into it. You got to teach the Odyssey, that sort of thing. If you're doing a historical survey of the hero and anti-hero, you got to do certain things. But I also looked at my class and realized, of course, about half the people in my class were women. And the syllabus that I was handed, everything was written by men, everything was about men. And so in that case, I was able to adjust things by adjusting my content. I could still address the theme by choosing other novels later on in the course. So, in terms of the content, that there is that flexibility in some areas that you don't have in others. One of the things that I will say about different experiences, as far as addressing those people who are coming from different backgrounds. I taught at two small liberal arts institutions. The first was Judson University, the second was East West University. The first served primarily middle to middle upper class white kids. The second institution served primarily Black and brown kids from a lower class. Only 5% of the population there was white. So I had this adjustment to make. And the interesting thing, the thing that stuck for me and what you said, David, about when you went to school, going to university was your job. I heard that being used from some of the professors at East West University. You got to buckle down. This is your job now. Well, the fact of the matter was, for a lot of them, their job was their job because they were supporting their family. And there's other things going on that I had to account for. Other thing about underserved populations, or things that you maybe have done to adjust sometimes?
This is a really small thing to do, but I definitely am deliberate about going through the slides that I show and making sure that there's a lot of diversity in the pictures I choose. And that's one of those things that if you're not thinking about it, your subconscious is going to make those choices. And we just tend to gravitate towards people who look like ourselves. And so again, that's a very small thing to do, but I think it's still important. And then, like you said, when it comes to examples, you were talking about literature examples, but like when I describe a sociological concept or something, or some event in history, I definitely am deliberate about choosing minority examples, people of color examples, and things like that, in the hopes that it will relate more to the students.
Absolutely. And again, it seems like it's superficial, it seems like it's minor, but the fact of the matter is that students always have to see themselves within the subject area, right? And so that's a pretty clear way in which they see themselves or don't see themselves in the classroom.
And again, this is super easy for me because I teach sociology, so this is kind of in my wheelhouse in terms of material for the class. But just talking about some of these things, I'm trying to think for like Cole, like I'm wondering how does race and learning math intersect, and how that would be a lot more challenging to kind of intersect that, bring those two to the classroom. But for me, I'm talking about these things, and I found just talking about them in plain terms to the class has made a big difference. I taught a dual credit class at a high school, a couple of them, where I had only high school students. And I was surprised at how in the first couple of weeks, they almost seemed shocked because I would talk about Black people, or as I'm saying these things, just in normal conversation in the class, I could see them kind of like tensing up, like, oh my gosh, is he talking about, is a white guy up there talking about Black people? And it's just, but then at the college level, I don't get that kind of reaction at all. So I think that's because in the college environment, we can talk about these things. We're supposed to be engaging in discourse about things in life, and I think that goes a long way in helping a lot of students in your classroom feel included.
At East West University, I taught an intro to journalism course. And again, similar, taught an intro to media writing course at Judson, but at Judson, the beat areas that students chose were often broad, like fashion or entertainment. When it came to working with students at East West, they would often do local coverage areas. So they cover crime or something like that because they knew their neighborhoods. So they were very invested in the local area. And very often I would talk about some of the issues that we're facing in Chicago, and they may have dealt with economics or may have dealt with race. But I would always defer to them. I would always say, but I think you guys have a better voice and a better handle on some of these things than I do. So part of it was to share that authority. The other thing that I wanted to mention, so because I've been sort of struggling with it, the idea that math is math, or that computer science is computer science, or welding is welding, because there are certain things that just have to be learned in those areas. And one of the things that I ran into with a professor that I knew who taught architecture, he says, I teach a course that is all about building codes. Building codes are what they are. I can't really invite students in different ways. But one of the things that I did in my writing courses is I would often gauge what students had learned in the past, because I would often make assumptions about their learning. And they would tell me about different ways that they approached writing in their experience, things that they were taught. And while that is not necessarily engaging directly with their unique culture, it is engaging with their past experience. And it often gave me some really useful information. And one of the things that goes along with culturally responsive teaching is that you don't shy away from the fact of the matter. And so sometimes I would just say, you guys were not taught well. That's the fact of the matter. Those rote exercises that you went through didn't help you at all as a writer. So sometimes I would address things that way. I have Donna Beagle up there again, because I wanted to mention this. This was Denise Anderson and I were planning to do a session at Faculty Development Day where we talked about one of the cultural differences that she identified between, say, a lower class culture and a middle to middle upper class culture. And one of the things that she did was she applied this model for oral cultures versus literate cultures. And she said that when it came to lower classes, they tended to be more oral culture oriented. And that's partly the immediate interchange, that is the relationship between people. So that's actually related to kinship in some ways, because it's not as formal, it's more informal. It's dependent upon shared knowledge, usually proverbial learning, where literate culture is very much oriented towards formal ways of storing knowledge. It's oriented towards long speeches. It's not oriented towards interaction. It's much more a lecture model when it comes to things that are going on in the classroom. And so there are different ways of learning that are applied in there. And that's one of the things that I think could potentially come out. And I will go down because, Cole, this slide was particularly with what you brought up in mind. That's some of the things that we might keep in mind, is that we might have to teach in some different ways to address the different things. So 3 basic components that are generally associated with culturally responsive teaching are culturally relevant pedagogy, student learning, prioritizing students' intellectual growth and their ability to problem solve, cultural competence, students can appreciate their culture, and also developing some fluency in other cultures, and critical consciousness, teaching students how to identify, analyze, and solve real-world problems. Now, the question there is, maybe that works well. If we're talking about real-world problems, maybe that's where you live, David, in a sociology class, right? But maybe that's not necessarily, when we're dealing with the abstractions of numbers, maybe that's not where you live, Cole. So let's talk a little bit about this to figure out how we might, incorporate some of these things, these 3 bullet points into classes that might not seem to lend themselves to that naturally.
Yeah, I mean, the first point there is, I mean, that could be the mission statement for any math class you like. I mean, that's exactly what we want to do. I mean, similarly, the third bullet point is exactly what section 1.3 of Math 115 is. I mean, those are verbatim exactly what you're trying to accomplish in a math class. The only practical constraint you are up against is you do have to, math classes are very standardized nationally even. College algebra here is college algebra down the street is college algebra at U of I almost. So you are up against the one practical constraint of you must accomplish, being able to find the zeros of a quadratic, if you want to take college algebra, then take calculus. So there is some amount of practical constraint, but these tenets are pretty aligned with math courses. Obviously, I skipped the second bullet point. And it's not that I don't want to do that. I want to do that. I just don't want to do that in like the only great ways I can think about it are sort of these trite cliche ways where it's like, let's work a math example that, involves race somehow, or let's work a math example that involves the gender pay gap. And maybe that's good and that's doing enough, but it just sort of feels like that's sort of the league minimum, and I don't want to do the league minimum.
What you mentioned there was what I was going to say, as far as the first two bullet points, that seems to be ideally what we like to do in a lot of classrooms, right? And yes, we don't ever want to do the league minimum, but one of the things that I think will often happen is if we start off with the league minimum, then that can lead to other conversations, right? One of the things that is regularly advocated when it comes to this type of teaching, this type of learning. So you'll see up above that I switched to CRT&L, culturally responsive teaching and learning, is that you learn together. So it's definitely not teacher-centered. It's what we would refer to as student-centered. I don't know if I always like flipping those terms, because when we're talking about student-centered, we're not actually saying that we're pushing it all on them. We're saying that we're working cooperatively, right? We're working cooperatively in a group. And I think that is an interesting way to approach these types of things. It could be problem solving, right? But you do this collectively. And I think whenever I go back to my experience with group work, I always think about the things that I specifically ask students to do and the ways in which they often take those things and go off track with them. You see my air quotes? But I say off track. One of the things that people often acknowledge is that when students go off track, they're still working, right? It's kind of like when we talk about young children and play, they're actually still functioning. And by the way, if I break a bunch of faculty members into small groups, eventually they do that too. They go off track. But it doesn't mean that they aren't still working in those ways. They're extending a lot of the things that we're talking about. Our next slide is just sort of an encapsulation, this idea that it's all circular, and the arrows go back and forth, right, between teaching, learning, and assessment there. So the basic starting point when it comes to strategies is that we have students learning from teachers, teachers learning from students, and ultimately forming this dynamic circle of teaching. Now, I think that we've all sort of heard about this when we've talked about student-centered learning. So I'm going to move on to these 4 basic components here. This comes right out of the book, Culturally Responsive Teaching. And so she suggests that there's a couple of different ways in which we can be culturally responsive teachers. One is to be culturally responsive, and that is just to pay attention to your students, know who they are, and to adjust accordingly. This is something that can take place when we're looking at a particular group of students, or it could be something that takes place when we're working with an individual. So I'm going to borrow from the story that you may have heard if you were at the last faculty development day. Bill Isham shared about one of his students who, it was a student who was hard of hearing or deaf, but definitely needed to have people who were signing for that student. The people who were signing, they didn't understand all of the technical terms that he was trying to communicate. So he created a visual dictionary for the signers, and then the student used it as well, and in turn, the other students used it too. So this is sort of a typical, universal design, like how we start with responding to one student, and then it becomes something larger. Models of caring. This is where we create an environment where students feel secure. It's that sense of belonging thing that we were talking about at the professional development day. A sense of belonging has a very practical effect. As long as people are feeling secure within the classroom, both encouraged to succeed, right? Really challenged, but also not necessarily feeling shamed when they fail. This is something that's really important. And when it comes to models of caring, I always look down the hallway for me to Paulette Gilbert, who is so good at this. She is so good at knowing her students and making sure that they feel secure. She checks to make sure that they've had something to eat today. I always think that's never something I did as a professor, but she knows where a lot of them are coming from. Culture and communication. This is about sort of building in a civil discourse, which sometimes can work one way or the other in a classroom. Sometimes people are afraid to share because they're afraid that what they're going to say will be controversial, shut down. Sometimes they share the wrong things, right? That do not respect the other person because they have not been taught civil discourse. Brian Wagner is excellent when it comes to this type of thing in his philosophy class. He always encourages these sorts of open discussions, but he also moderates, right? He always pulls back students when they go too far or they take things personally. The last one is content diversity. And like we said, in some areas, this is probably easier than others. My example from my own experience was that, yes, I can change the novels that I'm teaching, but Cole, like you said, there's certain things that they have to learn, or I think about certain CTE classes where there's certifications, right? They have to know this stuff so that they can pass that written certification. So there's certain things that have to be covered, but the question is, how can we work within those frameworks? So any comments about those 4 areas, like places where you are saying, okay, I really get that and I gravitate in that direction?
Yeah, I think 1 and 2 really resonate with me, and I try to do those, all the time. I mean, I do a lot of small group work, and I circulate during that time, and you're very much. I'm a big fan of Confucius, and at one point someone goes to Confucius and is like, hey, you're such a great master, but you told Yen Hui to run headstrong into something, and you told Adept Kung to be restrained, but it was the same situation. How can you give 2 people different advice if they're in the same situation? And Confucius is like, well, Yen Hui is timid, so you got to urge him on, and Adept Kung is not timid, so you got to hold him back. So you got to always try to give the person in front of you what they need. And you try to draw that out in math with questioning. Say, hey, they say, I don't get this. You say, what part of it don't you get? It's like, and you got to figure out where they're at, and so you can respond to them. So that resonates really well and is super applicable in a math class. And that's only accomplished if you care about your students, right? And they're going to tell if you're being legit or not. So models of caring. I mean, you need to have a welcoming environment to make that type of thing work.
Yeah, and in my in-person classes, I put them in teams of 5, and I arrange the desks so that they're sitting with these 5 people, other 4 people, for the whole semester. And I think putting some effort into team building those 5 in the beginning of the semester is important, as opposed to just saying you're in this group, guys, go, kind of thing. This week, because it's the first week, I had them do a little personal identity wheel when they shared some favorites. And it was pretty funny because one group, a pretty diverse group of 5, I said, did you find anything in common? And they said, yeah, 2 of us have the same favorite color of orange. 3 of us like sushi as our favorite food. And then 2 of them have the same favorite band, which included the word garden. So then when I had them come up with a team name, that group came up with something like Orange Sushi Garden, which I think would be a great name for a band also. But anyway, Orange Sushi Garden. And anyway, I think that demonstrates some level of genuineness in, I want you to get along and know each other, as opposed to just, I want you to work together on a project or something like that. So I think that leads to number 3 a little bit with culture and communication.
Can I ask you, do you get pushback on the group work? Is there just sort of inherent buy-in, or how do you sell it? Because sometimes I get a lot of pushback. It's like, I don't want to work in a group on this math.
Yeah, Cole, I'll be honest with you. I've had a complete utter failures. As a matter of fact, I've completely abandoned. I used to have them do a semester-long group project in those teams, and I've abandoned it because it just became way too drama-filled. Uh, but what I do have them do is team quizzes. So they're in class together and they're working on a quiz as a team of 5. And so it's a really short-term, goal-focused project for them to deal with. Yeah, I'll be honest, I haven't figured out how you do long-term projects because I always get the whole, so-and-so isn't doing anything, Mr. Dozier, and I'm doing all the work and all this stuff. And finally, I'm just like, forget it. I'm not doing this anymore. So if you have any, Terry, if you got any advice, I don't know.
Well, okay, so 2 things. I have a question, and also general advice. I'll start with the second first. The general advice in terms of group work, what I've seen is that what you just described, David, is most effective when it's really goal focused and they see the advantage to it. So that could be something along the lines of putting them in a group to take a quiz. Because they're always going to assume that there's some things I may know, but I don't know everything, and I'd be better off with a group of 5. So as long as they're viewing it that way, in my in my writing classes, I would teach argument, and one of my activities was a multi-day group project where they would research a topic that I give them. But it was all, they knew from the beginning that their group was working towards a debate with the other group. And that seemed to, part of it was that it was for a grade, so they needed to work well together. But a lot of people got jazzed by the competition. So as long as they have an investment, it's difficult to sell. You need to work together because you're going to learn something. that is not necessarily inherently rewarding for a lot of the students. But if it's oriented towards something that they're doing in class, particularly something that they think will be beneficial, I will be stronger in this debate if I have my 5 friends who've also researched 5 other articles on this than I would have been by myself. So there's that. The other thing the question that I wanted to ask, David, you said you grouped people together, so they were sitting together throughout the semester. Does that enable you to slide more easily into group work when they're consistently with the same people?
Yeah, I was going to say that as opposed to the term group work and how we think about it, I mostly use these small teams for discussion. So almost every class I'll have what I call a table talk session where I'll throw out a question and I want those 5 to talk about it. And then we'll come together and debrief. So really that's what I use the groups most for, is I want them to interact. And I think when they're talking to the same people week after week, there's some familiarity there, and it might facilitate a quicker discussion. You're not getting around all that social unease of here's a new person I got to talk to. And I don't know about you, but when I was a student, when they would do pair and share thing and I'd get with somebody, I hated that. It was so uncomfortable to go to, talk one-on-one with somebody who I've never talked to before. But that's the main reason that I use those groups, is for them to talk with each other about big questions.
There have been a lot of studies on the benefits of being in a cohort model. So when you move through a program with the same people, so as opposed to the constant shuffle of moving into different classes, which I think actually does have its benefits, and there's been a comparison contrast studies on it. But when it comes to the cohort model, that usually lends itself to this sort of communal investment in what they're doing, and often will make them comfortable with pairing off or whatever they need to do in smaller configurations.
I'll also say that when it comes to the team quizzes and other things where I'll say something like, hey, listen, everybody, this is not a competition. I just want to see who would win. And I always get a lot of perplexed looks like, what? What is that? So anyway, it's just some fun I have. I don't know why I shared that, but
One more super detailed or question for you, David. On those group quizzes, do they turn in one document and every 5 person gets scored off that one document? Do you allow someone to turn in their own document, or how do you know? Okay, it's
No, it's a scratch off card, and together as a group, they have to decide which one they want to scratch off as their answer, A, B, C, D, or E. And then if they get it wrong, they got to keep guessing, and they're losing points every time they get it wrong. So they turn in the card, and that's what I score, and that's it for the team. And then I let the class decide at the first beginning of the semester, if somebody's not there as a class, do you want them to get the same score that the team got? Or do you want them to get a 0? They never go for that, by the way. Or do you want them to give a chance to make up? So sometimes I'll have a ad hoc group of 3 or 4 who had missed a particular team quiz come together to do it as a makeup, but that's pretty rare.
so they almost always just say give them the points if they're not here.
Yeah, pretty much.
How do you deal with one person in the group of 5 coming up to being like, I insisted on all the right answers. They got all the wrong answers. If I was alone, I would have had a perfect score, but I got a 0. How do you deal with that?
I'll be honest, it's never come up.
Okay.
It's never come up. I don't know what I would say if they came up. I'd probably just say, oh, sorry. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the groups, it's actually good to encourage a certain amount of introspection. You know, like the idea that you know, some people did more work than others, but it takes a long way to move past the intergroup sniping to actually get to a point where people are honest about that with each other. And the one time in terms of my class configuration that it has worked, I'll go back to the Intro to Journalism class, because there it was very project oriented. You know, we were turning out articles, and there was a paper, a physical paper that was published twice a semester. Not everyone got their stuff in, but we were all working collectively towards that goal. And so we had a lot of conversation. We had a lot of collaborative work. We got to a point where people would say, you know, and you know, while John was there in the room, John really didn't do any of the work on it. And John would say, yeah, that was true, because he knew that wasn't the end of it, right? There was another opportunity. This is my group. I can't have bad faith with them. So, but it takes a long time before you have that. One other thing that I'll mention, because you mentioned the sort of not interested in who does the best, but I want to know who will win, or whatever exactly you said, David. Actually, when it comes to culturally responsive teaching, one of the recommendations is to build a sense of humor into what you do in the classroom. It's very difficult for students to feel comfortable and to think creatively about their topics unless they have that sort of buffer to realize that this is not always serious. This is not me always on the edge of a cliff about to fall off. So that's just as a side note, but also important. Now I'm going to just run through this real quick because I want to make sure that Grant has time here. But there's a couple of quotations in the slides. We won't look at them now. These are directly from Culturally Responsive Teaching by Geneva Gay, so feel free to take a look at them. In this slide, I also have a reference to a video that is in the Eagle course. I encourage you to take a look at it. Maybe some of you have. I sent it out on Friday when Faculty Development Day was canceled. The reason I'm including it here, the video itself is just a way that I caught up with students from last year's student panel. I just wanted to find out what they were doing. But the interesting thing is that they're all coming from different backgrounds. We have a student who is ex-military, so a veteran. We have a student who is struggling with economic disadvantages, and she's also an English language learner. We have 2 students who are African American, and as they were talking about what they were doing, their cultural identity worked very much into their educational experience and determined a lot of the things that they decided to do. So it's not necessarily directly involved with what we were talking about today, but it does show how important that identity can be in someone's learning. So feel free to take a look at that. It's a great video. It'll warm your heart. They're great students. It's a short 10-minute video. This is just me at the end. Reasons why culturally relevant teaching and learning should not be controversial. And this was just the most basic of introductions. I would really love to dig in some more, and hopefully we'll have that opportunity at a future development day. But culturally relevant teaching and learning is student-centered. It avoids a deficit perspective, okay? It avoids saying that my students are lacking something, but maybe they've already got something that I can build on. I just have to find what that is. So it encourages respect. It uses what students know. It argues that everyone can learn. It recommends mutually dependent learning communities, that we all can learn from each other, and advocates for student success. And those are the kind of things that I think we can pretty easily get behind. Comments or questions? All right, so I'm going to stop sharing right now and turn it over to you. Okay, cool.
I would like to know later how Cole can work humor into a math class.
Oh, I'm hilarious. It's like it's a type 5 at the beginning of every class. I'm never serious.
So I think I wanted to start off this meeting. By the way, my name is Grant Schubert. I think my title is the Executive Director of Training and Development. You've probably never seen me before because I'm housed at the ATC out in Belvedere. Norb and I work together. I see him here and there. But if anybody wants a tour of the ATC, I'm there 8 to 5. It's an old shopco. You can find me where I think they used to lock up the shoplifters in the back. So anytime you guys need a tour, you can have my contact is all on Corey and all that stuff.
I just want to say, it is an amazing facility.
Yeah, I always tell people
before. I knew it as a shopco, and
Yeah.
I was like, okay. But it is amazing what the space has been made into.
And I always tell people, you can only show a new car off for so long. So if you come visit in 2 years, it's going to be 2 years older. So come see it now. We have amazing CNC machines. Our welding lab's incredible. We just moved our truck driver training out there. We have a $350,000 semi simulator that's just awesome. And all our amateur equipment and PLCs are top of the line. So come visit. That is an aside. Peter, by the way, it got help put into a meeting. So I'm going to kind of take the lead on this. But sometimes I've had meetings at different organizations I've been involved in, and 10 minutes into the meeting, everybody is sitting there saying, why did this meeting get called? There's a catalyst of why it took place, but no one's telling you. So I always want to make sure if I have meetings like this, I want to be transparent. The idea of reentry was brought up to a mixed group of Rock Valley staff, and people all of a sudden started asking if they were safe at work, which was to be transparent, a silly question because they've been at work and they've been safe. And so this was just an opportunity. We got another group together to talk about how we can educate the people at Rock Valley about what is currently happening with the reentry population. So this was something that we put together just to kind of break down the silo of what's been going on. Vonnie just popped in. She's been a huge component for many years here at Rock Valley working with these populations. But we just kind of wanted to go through it to make sure people knew what we were doing. I know that everybody's in their own kind of field here at Rock Valley, and sometimes you don't understand the breadth of what this institution offers to our community. So this is really an opportunity to have that discussion and answer any questions and maybe remedy any fears. So yeah, I introduced myself. I actually used to be an instructor here at Rock Valley. I was an English adjunct instructor for 3.5 years. And then I wasn't. And so they brought me on full time and paid me, a lot more than I ever made as an adjunct. And then they asked me to come back as an adjunct. And I decided that was a bit of humility I wasn't willing to swallow. So I went out and tried to build a career that I had kind of told my students to build. So what that ended up being was I worked at United Way of Rock River Valley in two what we call high priority neighborhoods, which were working with people getting out of jails and prisons. I actually then went to Goodwill because they received a grant called Life Launch, which is where I met Bonnie, that worked with individuals getting out of prison and jail to try to get them certifications, education, housing, to try to help them rebuild and re-enter society in a healthy way. Bonnie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Yvonne Busker. I go by Bonnie. I have been at Rock Valley College for 17 years, and I have been filled with gratitude that I've been able to work with this population and work at Rock Valley College for this many years. It's been a pleasure to help people get employment. And I don't know, there's probably a lot more I could say about myself, but I'm gonna just cut it off there. I will be leaving the meeting early. I'm gonna say that because I do have another re-entry meeting I'm going to. I'm not sure if we'll touch on it today or not, but April is second chance month. And so there will be a couple re-entry events happening that Rock Valley College will be involved in.
Cool, thank you. So, and I guess this is, just for the group, I think it's one of those things where sometimes it's helpful to define words in a communal sense, so we're not operating off of two different assumptions as far as definitions are concerned. So anybody can chime in when they hear the word reentry. What do they think of when we say reentry students or reentry population? Not everybody at once. We're gonna do small.
It's an unfamiliar term to me, to be honest. So.
Oh, real? Okay, I appreciate the honesty. So the reentry term, and this is one of those terms where maybe in higher education it's already changed. But when I came across the word reentry 2.5 years ago, what it was is trying to build safe and healthy pathways for individuals who've been incarcerated to re-enter society. And I think that sometimes this has become a blanket term for anybody who's done any type of incarceration. But what I think its true intention was, it was for people that had lost social skills because of the amount of time they had been incarcerated, or they had lost the pivotal documents to re-enter society. And to speak a little bit to my background, I ran a program for 18 to 24-year-olds, which we then realized there was a whole population incarcerated in Winnebago County Jail that we weren't touching because they were over 24 and we didn't have funding. Our local Goodwill, which is at the forefront of reentry programming, decided, let's go to the jail and help people 25 to 70 to see what they need. And what we really saw, and this goes back to this kind of cultural responsiveness, we thought they needed soft skill development, or we thought they needed resources, for clothes or whatever. But what a lot of these guys told us is they didn't have a social security card. And you are unable to get a social security card while incarcerated in a prison or jail. So they were getting out and they didn't have a social security card, so they couldn't get a job. They didn't have a driver's license because they either had fines or didn't have the means to get the driver's license. So they didn't have the essentials, right, to re-enter society. So Goodwill took on, and I took on the task of making sure those individuals had those things in motion post-release, so they weren't, kind of hitting the ground pause, because that pause lent themselves to making the decisions that had previously got them incarcerated. One of the most incredible stories, and this goes to, understanding and learning from the people you work with. I met a guy in Winnebago County Jail who was 17 years old, and I don't know what he did, I didn't ask, but he got locked up in prison for 14 years. So from 17 to 31, he was in prison. By the time he got out, both his parents had died. He had no family left. And he told me, man, the only thing I know how to do is this. He's like, so I figured it out. I was out for 3 months, and he was back in facing another 5 years. And what we were trying to do is build infrastructure to make sure that people didn't have to make that drastic decision. And I know that was I think that was a Shawshank Redemption bit too, but that was my real life to meet this guy and to understand kind of the desperation of what not knowing how to reenter, and then not only not knowing, but not having the tools to reenter if you know how to. So it became imperative that we gave those skills and those tools to these individuals. So one of the things, like I said, we wanted this to be an opportunity to educate our people at Rock Valley about the things we already do. Like I said, I was very proud to work at Goodwill because of the tangible things we were giving these individuals, but there is nobody doing more in-jail work as far as education than Rock Valley College. So this just shows you the amount of things that we do. This data is very positive. The Rock Valley College offers a GED program at the RIC, which is where individuals get released to, where they meet their probation officers, take piss tests, do all the things that the state needs them to do to get released. So that has become a one-stop shop for individuals for a variety of things, counseling, therapy. But Rock Valley has taken the lead on GED courses taught at the RIC and inside the Winnebago County Jail. I can tell you from experience, I've gone to the graduation ceremonies for these inmates. It is a powerful tool we are able to give these inmates. Rock Valley provides the favorite food for every individual that is graduating or obtaining their GED. It's a really cool thing, and something that it's one of the, I want people to know what we're doing, but also be proud of what we're doing. We also offer a CNC class. It's an 8-week class taught by Dave Butts inside the jail. I think it's 5 days a week for 8 weeks. We have 50 plus people graduating from that a year. So they're gaining basic CNC skills and knowledge with the hope that once they get out, and we'll talk about that, that they have a pathway towards work, right? I can tell you when I first started working at Goodwill 2.5 years ago, maybe even more, employers were very specific about the people that they would employ. And as the COVID hit and the workforce tightened, those restrictions really lightened up. There is a path for individuals with backgrounds to make a really good living if they are obtaining the skills, and Rock Valley is part of that. One of the other things we're really going to work on is...
Grant, I'm going to interrupt. Dave has a question for you.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. You're on mute.
Sorry, Grant, I may have missed it. What does CNC stand for?
Computer numerical controls. So that, what we're teaching them are the skills to program a machine so they can make parts, which is a huge employment field here in the region, which is also what we do at another level at the ATC. One of the cool things when we all got together to talk about reentry after people got scared that we were serving these students, we talked about how a lot of our programming was geared towards males specifically. So one of the low-hanging fruits that we thought about was this presentation, to educate, to inform people about what we're doing, but also open up our programming and open up our engagement to the women that are currently incarcerated in Winnebago County Jail. So many of us are going through our background checks and our PREA training to begin to do, whether quarterly or monthly, information sessions to the women currently housed in Winnebago County Jail. What that'll be is just to tell them the wide breadth of resources that we have here at Rock Valley College and the future that they can build for themselves by engaging with our institution. I'm talking fast, I know. Still with me? So one of the things we wanted to show is that we're offering these in-jail services, but we do not stop with in-jail. We have many post-release partnerships. Bonnie's been pivotal in building these partnerships over the years. And they aren't just what you see here, but a lot of these programs that are built on federal, state dollars, Goodwill, Workforce Connection, have participants that are directly engaging with Rock Valley College. Whether that be through Bonnie and I used to work together when I was at Life Launch. I think I put 95 to 100 individuals through forklift training. Because that was a great opportunity for these mostly young men, because they didn't have a high school diploma, they wanted to work, they didn't have any work background, so we could at least get them a certification, and then I would hire them at Goodwill to to try to get them into a warehouse in the community. So we are constantly checking in with these partnerships to help these individuals engage with Rock Valley College. Get Connected 815 is an amazing institution run by someone with lived experience. And she works with individuals. Her name is Tratera Flowers. You can Google her. She works with individuals, I think from 18 all the way up to whatever age people are getting released from prison. She tries to build relationships with individuals while incarcerated, and then to try to help them re-enter successfully, she meets them where they're at in their housing, and then tries to get them a gig and get them what they need. What is our official title with Winnebago County, Bonnie? What is that work group?
The Regional Planning Center, Partnerships to Reentry.
There you go.
Strategic partnerships.
Yeah, so Bonnie's really helped out. We've recently engaged with Winnebago County to become the educational kind of spoke to this larger planning committee to how we can serve these communities. But before we started becoming a part of that, we wanted to make sure that people knew what we were already doing. So we wanted to start in-house before we built outside of here. So that's another reason I'm giving this presentation. So Rock Valley College, and I think this was the misconception that beget this journey. Obviously, anybody, if some guy has a high school diploma and he goes to prison for 10 years and gets out, he can enroll at Rock Valley College, right? There is no obstacle towards that. So we've had individuals with, what we call, justice involvement in our hallways and on our campus, probably since this place got built, right? I don't know if you know this, but about 700,000 Americans are released from the prisons every year. So we have no shortage of people that have justice involvement in America. It is one of our highest, we incarcerate more people per capita than any nation in the world. So these individuals are amongst us. As someone who worked with hundreds of young people that were getting out of juvenile justice or prison, they're just normal people, right? A lot of them. And so I think that was the misconception, that people all of a sudden thought they were going to see people walking with like leg, shackles on and an orange jumpsuit into their classroom. And that's just not the reality of it. So obviously I think that's to show that all of our courses are offered to individuals with justice involvement if they meet the requirements needed. But we've been very intentional in building and gaining grants in certain programming that is geared towards individuals that may have had some type of justice involvement in the past. So what you see here is the HCCTP program, which Bonnie is over. Dawson is an amazing individual who has just built up this nationally renowned program that serves many marginalized communities, but also a part of that is people with justice involvement. The WEI program, which is our Workforce Equity Initiative, also nationally renowned. Sierra Morris runs that. They are trying to build a workforce that is marginalized. So part of that is working with individuals who've been justice involved. They offer many different certifications in CNC, some type of nursing, truck driver training, a bunch of different fields that I think are really accessible to people that maybe don't have a significant work background or beyond an education, beyond a diploma. What we're really trying to work on is these guys that get their 8-week CNC inside of the Winnebago County Jail. We're trying to reach out to them, and I'll talk about that more, to get them to the ATC and to make sure that they're continuing their education in manufacturing. So that's one thing we're trying to work on. Another program, and not a lot of people know this, but our truck driver training program is bursting at the seams. Right now, it's a 3-month wait list. And the reason by that is pretty simple. It is our shortest training with the least amount of obstacles, and it pays the most money, right? That is I think that's the algorithm for filling up classes. And I can tell you from experience, when I started at Goodwill 2.5, 3 years ago, you needed a clean background to drive a truck. It was even to the point where I think if you had a 25 or over speeding ticket, it was an arduous path to getting your license. And by the time I left, they were like, "Hey, so you stole a car when you were 19? What's the big deal? Let's move some Amazon product. You know what I mean? So that field has really changed and has become a great area for individuals who may have justice involvement in their past to make a really good and substantial living. I worked with a guy, his name was Keon. He went through my program, got his truck driver license, and within 3 months, he was making 6 figures, and called me and didn't know where he was in the United States. Just said, man, I don't know where I'm at, but I'm making money. And I was like, sounds good to me. So it's really an amazing thing that we're doing. And like I said, if you come out for an HCC tour and meet our truck driver training instructors, we talk about cultural response. They meet these guys where they're at. They can talk their language, guys and girls. They're there at all times. We have night classes running. It's a really great group, and I think a group that is very accepting of people from all backgrounds, including justice involvement. I included forklift because that was where this all started. It's the only reason I have this job, because forklift during COVID was a certification that could lead people to a significant pay bump and allow them to get into a manufacturing space where they could grow. And we're still running that. We're running that. How many forklift classes do we have a quarter, Bonnie?
Anywhere from 4 to 8. And we're adding them this last semester. I think we had to add an additional 3 in the month of December.
And one of the things I talk about with forklift is, when I started my gig, I was like, what's the big deal about a forklift certification? And a lot of the individuals I was working with hadn't had a win in a long time. So to have that one-day class and to get that win changed the way people, change their body language, change the way their head moved. I mean, change the way they, went up and thanked the instructor, and I think that was really telling for me to learn that and to not undersell how important it is to get a win, to learn something, to become an expert even on a small thing. It was really powerful. I also saw that once we got them forklift certified, building that confidence made them the entry into a workplace much more healthy. Because the individuals I was working with, anxiety manifested in very bad decisions. So to remove that anxiety, so when they had to jump on a forklift, they felt confident, they could move confidently. It changed the way they interacted with their space. So I think that's, even though it feels like a small thing, a 1 or 2 day training, it was massive in the way it changed people's perceptions of themselves.
And question. So the truck driver who's getting a 6-figure salary, he's got a good career, and I'm sure that's a great entry for someone with the forklift certification. But do we see those students coming back for other certifications or other trainings?
I think mine were pretty one-off. I think we worked with a few to try to alley forklift into TDT. To be fully transparent, a lot of the individuals I worked with, probably 85%, couldn't get their driver's license.
Yeah.
Because it was either they didn't have a car to have someone loan it to them to go take the exam, or they had restrictions based on they got in a hit and run when they were 16, so they couldn't get a license till they're 18, and they had to pay off $3,500 worth of fines before they could. So I think we can work on that pathway, in a much more significant way, which I think goes right into what we're talking about now.
And I'm gonna go back for that too, to kind of piggyback off of that, Terry. Like with our highway construction careers training program, that's the HCCTP, that's funded through IDOT. So a couple of our re-entry people that have come through that are now in apprenticeships. So it might not be leading them back to Rock Valley College to take classes right now, but they are in a 5-year apprenticeship program. So even though it's not Rock Valley, it's a partnership, they're giving back to the community through funding, and then they are encouraging other people to attend Rock Valley College because of their positive experience. So I think we have to sometimes look at that as a pathway too, that maybe they're not coming back and increasing their knowledge, but they're saying, hey, I took this forklift class, I took TDT, I went through HCCTP, and there's these work resources there for you. So I think we need to look at some of that too, on how that's funneling back into the college.
Sure, thank you, Bonnie. So I think part of what we want to do is we kind of want to, plant our flag in the ground that this has been going on for years. We're really proud of the work we've done, but I think one of the things we want to work on is being very intentional moving forward. One of the ways that we want to be intentional is to include the reentry population as part of our specialist populations. You might know who helps with that. And so to really work on understanding the individuals that need our resources, also understanding the overlap. Many of our special populations, bleed into one another. And I don't think reentry is the exception to that. You have this active versus passive, point B. We've been very passive in the way we've, enrolled people with reentry backgrounds in the past. We're currently creating a database of every individual that gets their GED through RBC. And we want to make sure when they get their GED, someone's calling their phone or sending them an email to say, hey, the path forward is here, and it's at Rock Valley College, and we're ready to accept you with open arms. Same with CNC. Peter Held, who missed this meeting but has been amazing, has put together this mechanism where if a person in our CNC class gets released from prison, we're notified that day, and we can contact them to make their reentry into society a little bit easier, to say, hey, we got resources for you. We have, more classes for you. We have a clothing closet for you if you need it. So I think we're really working on becoming very active in the way that we tell people we work with the reentry community. And one way we're doing that is to make sure that we have a touch point. That hasn't fully manifested. I think for right now, I've kind of taken on that mantle of calling people and emailing. But I think as we move forward and this expands, we want to make sure that if someone has questions because they don't know how to re-enter, this type of institution or society in general, Rock Valley College has someone who can have those answers for them. That maybe starts with a website, but I know from experience that human touch really can't be replicated by any resource pool or hyperlink. And I think as soon as we're known in these communities as a place that is accepting, that is understanding, that is responsive, I think word of mouth in this community will be powerful. So I think that's kind of how we are moving forward. I think the next slide is going to ask for questions, but I understand this is a lot of information. But yeah, we got questions.
Not so much a question, but just thanks for coming. This was great information. I'm stunned that people could be in prison for 10 years and then they don't even help them get a social security card when they leave. I mean, that's just like, why on earth wouldn't you try to get these people documents? So I'm really glad that we've got people who are helping to facilitate that handoff, even though I wish it were, done at the state or federal level automatically. So thanks so much for what you're doing. It sounds great.
I appreciate that. My craziest story about that was I worked with a lady who had mental health issues, and she would get relocked up like every 3 months. And finally, the judge said, you can't re-enter society until you have all your documents, you're ready to go, because you need to get into a halfway house. And I can see her like in my mind's eye now. And so they brought us in, and all she needed was her social security card to get into the reentry house. She had an ID, she had her birth certificate, she was ready to go. And I was on the phone with Social Security, and they said, we are unable to send a social security card to a facility, to a state facility where someone is incarcerated. And I explained it to this bureaucrat. I said, well, the only way she can get out of this building is if you send a social security card. And as you can imagine, the social security administrator didn't give a shit. So what we had to do, because Goodwill was so solution focused, we actually registered her address at the Goodwill and got her. That was probably the coolest moment, to open up her social security card and be able to bring it to jail, to know that it was a get out of jail card that no one else could get. So it is incredible to be inside of a catch-22. And I think it is also demonstrative of what these individuals go through, right? So for me to be on the phone and no one cares about me and no one cares if I live or die in a building somewhere down on South Main, that was a trip. And I think it informed me moving forward about, the obstacles that these individuals face. So that was just a little anecdote for you.
Yeah, I want to echo some of those comments about coming in and helping increase awareness for what all the things are that Rock Valley College does, because this falls well in line with basically one of the biggest missions of a community college in general, right? Is to provide access to education for its regional residents. And I could see how this kind of population would easily be forgotten as one of those regional residents. So that's great. I was going to ask about, of all these programs, like, and this isn't coming from a place of who's paying for all this. I'm curious, like, are these mostly funded through grants and things like that, or prisoners who are like getting their GED and things like that, are they paying for this themselves, or how does that all work?
Well, I know the GED program is a resource provided by Rock Valley. So they don't pay anything. I think the CNC is also paid for by the jail. The jail signs a contract with us annually. It's good PR for them. They want to get the guys out of the cells. They have a full-time officer that watches the program. So they've been a really good partner, but they pay cash for that. WEI is state funded. Maurice West has been a really big proponent for us to continue to get that funding. HCCTP is state funding as well, right, Bonnie?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's state grants, and then there's some, the jail contract. And
Well,
then
the HCCTP is funded through Illinois Department of Education, Illinois Department of Transportation, but it is actual federal funds.
Okay. And right now, our TDT programming is free because of the ATC waiver that we have. So yeah, free education, short training, most money. That's the algorithm. So that's why we're out until March or April for seats.
Wow, it sounds to me like the true kind of frontline warriors of all this are the administrators, because I know working with grants and state funding is complex, and oh my gosh. So I imagine, Bonnie, you're making some of that happen, and that's amazing work.
Yeah, and Sierra Morris is like I said, she's nationally renowned. She heads up that grant. They've done some really great things as far as building in mechanisms to make sure people get compensated when they complete their certification. They get compensated when they get a job. And not to get into those tropes of like, it costs a lot more to incarcerate someone than it does to educate someone. So I think those allocation of those dollars, there's moments when you're like, they get paid how much to get the certification? But we pay a lot more if they just go back and sit in Stateville. So I think I think it's a really positive thing. I don't want to get too political.
I'm totally with you. So.
Well, one of the things I'll go back to, the fact that we were addressing this population. It's just people weren't entirely aware of it, and then when they were saying, "Are we safe?" I thought that's worth mentioning, considering what we were talking about in the first half. Is that there's this negative association with this particular cultural group, and that's the case very often when you look at the way that people react to many different cultural groups. We all have our biases, and so the basic idea of culturally responsive teaching is that we work together so that we can get past those biases. And I didn't even mention that today, but that's basically the first step before you really become invested in individuals and their culture. Once we can do that, which we are, we're invested in them. I think the important thing is that, as you said, the example at the beginning was the guy who got out and he didn't know what else to do, and so he was back in it 5 years. And in many ways, we have to help them become aware that the system can work in a different way for them, that it's not just going to work that way for them.
Right. And I think, one of the things I used to tell my guys is one, I used to say, whatever decision, based on your track record, whatever decision you think to make the opposite, and you're going to be in a better spot by the end of the day. But that was after 2 years of being pretty, hardened up by just seeing these guys make tough decisions. But one of the things was, and this is about reentry, and this is about recidivism. Once the system has its teeth in you, it doesn't want to let go. And so you have a system working against you. And I think this is our task, is to show how a system can work for you. And that's why I used to tell these guys, especially that, my little guys who are in gangs, they have 8 people on payroll working full time plus overtime to put you back in. So you got to make some really good choices to make sure they don't. And so I think that's the piece I always go back to is there's a system in place that you're used to, but if you make positive choices, there's a system in place, that can deliver you into a different spot. So yeah, those things are always on. Those systemic kind of forces, pushes and pulls, were always on my mind and still are. Yeah. Norb, you got any questions?
I don't, thank you, but this is all great. I just kind of piped in some comments. Thank you.
For sure. But yeah, and like I said, look me up on Corey if you ever want a tour, if you ever have any questions. If you ever have a student that you think that approaches you and divulges things through your relationship, that maybe they come from this, space, I'm happy to tag them into all the right resources or talk to them personally. This would, it was powerful work we did, and I think it's something that still resonates. So hopefully I can be a resource.
All right, so I want to give a special thanks to Grant and Devani, who I think had to move on to our next meeting, for coming in and letting us know about all of the things that are being done. I refer to it as initiative, but it's multiple initiatives that are in place for reentry students. And I think someone else mentioned it. It's so important to know that these things are happening because there are a lot of great things that we do at Rock Valley College, but we're not always aware of it.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for us to be mutually supportive if we're not aware of what's going on. Exactly. So it's great. And on that note, I'll actually mention a few things in closing, because there are things going on in the upcoming semester. And I'll always do this when it comes to our Instructional Innovators group, is to go ahead and share some of these things with you. Upcoming in February, we will have a poverty simulation on campus. So we've done several things to try to build on many of the multiple, again, initiatives for our economically challenged populations. So, had Donna Beagle come and speak at the Professional Development Day. We did the Donna Beagle book study. At the Fall Professional Development Day, Suzanne Miller talked about the criminalization of poverty. And we're having a poverty simulation in February. If you're not familiar with the idea of a poverty simulation, it is the experience of, it generates the experience of living through, I think it's a month in the life, or maybe 2 months in the life of someone who is living in poverty. You role play different people. So you're put into family groups and you have to deal with specific challenges. And what it does is, I think it reduces the weeks into 15-minute blocks. So you have to do certain things and you're able to see some of the struggles that someone living in poverty would go through. It is something we're doing in partnership with the Hunger Coalition. It is also a DEI event. So at the end of the poverty simulation, we'll have a debrief talking about the simulation, have lunch, and then the DEI department will have a session on social capital. So that'll be taking place, I think it's February 23rd, but I'll send it out to all of you so that you're aware of it. Also, some of you may have been at least in and out last year when we started putting together it was just a small cohort of faculty and some staff. We're talking about open educational resources and how we use them on campus and how we could use them. And we started to build some momentum. We had a session at Professional Development Day on that. And Lucas at the library, Luke Swenner has taken over as chair of a formal committee for OER. And so what he's done is he's built up resources on the library web. So if you want to dip your toe into open educational resources, or even if you've been regularly using it, he's got some fantastic pages that expose you to some of the places where you can find educational resources and how you can use them in the classroom. This spring, he has organized a sort of conversation series with 3 different faculty members. Mariah Nagy from biology, Lynn Vu from anthropology, and someone else who I'm totally forgetting. There's a third person. He's trying to get different subject areas represented. So these people are using open educational resources, and the reason he's trying to represent different subject areas is that you may be in a situation where you're thinking, yeah, open educational resources sound great because I don't want my students to pay for their resources, or I want to be able to build my own resources. But while that would work in that other subject, it wouldn't work in mine. There's tons of resources available in every subject area, and so this is his starting point. Is he's trying to create these conversations, and he's also going to have Nate Talon film them. I don't know if we've got dates for these 3 sessions yet, but I will find them out and I will share those with you as well, because those are other good opportunities. All right, any other questions or comments for the good of the cause?
Yeah, just before we close, maybe you already have every talk scheduled from now to the end of the year, but it'd be really great to hear about OER maybe from Nathan and during one of these, if that's on the table.
Oh yeah. Great. Maybe the next time, because that could be an opportunity to kick off the sort of discussion series that he has going on. I know both he and Kim took courses this last year on open educational resources, so they got a pretty broad and deep education in that. All right, anything else? Well, thank you all for coming out virtually and in person on this cold day. I appreciate you all. Keep up the good work. Had a good start to the week, even though it was pretty cold, and I hope that continues for all of you.
See you.
All right, take care.
Sweet. Dude, yeah, that was great. Yeah, it was sad when, because like, you know, shit hit the fan with a few people.
Yeah.
And I was just like, wait, you guys think that you're not interacting with these people at the grocery store, come on. The same people that think like downtown